Section 2. Dennett's narrative self. Dennett gives the examples of spiders and beavers who respectively and automatically spin webs and build dams in order to realize their biological selfhood. But how do humans achieve this? Dennett says that, quote, our fundamental tactic of self-protection, self-control, and self-definition is telling stories, and more particularly concocting and controlling the story we tell others and ourselves about who we are. And just as spiders don't have to think consciously and deliberately about how to spin their webs, and just as beavers, unlike professional human engineers, do not consciously and deliberately plan the structures they build, we, unlike professional human storytellers, do not consciously and deliberately figure out what narratives to tell and how to tell them. Our tales are spun, but for the most part, we don't spin them. They spin us. Our human consciousness and our narrative selfhood is their product, not their source, end quote. This instinctual human proclivity for producing narrative leads, according to Dennett, to the creation in each human being of a self, not at any locatable place within the human body, but rather as an abstract point from which the individual's storytelling activities can be understood. Dennett explains that, quote, these strings or streams of narrative issue forth as if from a single source, not just in the obvious physical sense of flowing from just one mouth or one pencil or pen, but in a more subtle sense. Their effect on any audience is to encourage them to, or at least try to, posit a unified agent whose words they are, about whom they are. In short, to posit a center of narrative gravity, end quote. So for Dennett, the human self is created and maintained by constantly producing and monitoring a personalized web of interrelated stories. He says, quote, an advanced agent must build up practices for keeping track of both its bodily and mental circumstances. In human beings, as we have seen, those practices mainly involve incessant bouts of storytelling and story checking, some of it factual and some of it fictional, end quote. Dennett emphasizes that in addition to presenting a self to others, the narrative center of gravity is just as important to the agent itself because it provides its own internal representation. Dennett says, quote, a self, according to my theory, is not any old mathematical point, but an abstraction defined by the myriads of attributions and interpretations, including self-attributions and self-interpretations, that have a part in the biography of the living body whose center of narrative gravity it is. As such, it plays a singularly important role in the ongoing cognitive economy of that living body, because of all the things in the environment an active body must make mental models of, none is more crucial than the model the agent has of itself. In addition, the narratively constructed self is also required to take on the role of being responsible in many social, educational, and legal contexts. Dennett explains, quote, "One of the most important roles of a self in our traditional conceptual scheme is as the place where the buck stops. Without this, won't the buck just get passed on and on, round and round forever? If there is no Oval Office in the brain, housing a highest authority to whom all decisions can be appealed, we seem to be threatened with a Kafkaesque bureaucracy of homunculi who always reply when challenged, 'Don't blame me, I just work here.' The task of constructing a self that can take responsibility is a major social and educational project," end quote. In true functionalist style, Dennett sees this narratively constructed self as completely independent of the brain and body out of which it was initially devised and maintained. In fact, Dennett sees the program of the self as being so independent and separable from this biological hardware that he speculates that it might survive death in another medium. He says, quote, "If you think of yourself as a center of narrative gravity, on the other hand, your existence depends on the persistence of that narrative, rather like the 1001 Arabian Nights, but all a single tale, which could theoretically survive indefinitely many switches of medium, be teleported as readily in principle as the evening news, and stored indefinitely as sheer information. If what you are is that organization of information that has structured your body's control system, or to put it in its more usual provocative form, if what you are is the program that runs on your brain's computer, then you could in principle survive the death of your body as intact as a program can survive the destruction of the computer on which it was created and first run," end quote.